of data and equipment. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Angie Yazelitis, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Schooner Strategies. Schooner is a marketing and communications firm, and we're very excited to work with Reclamere and to work with Angie Singer-Keating on their marketing and their public education efforts. For those of you who have not joined us for a Reclamere event in the past, Reclamere is a data security company offering a full range of specialized IT asset management and information security services. Founded in 2001, Reclamere is a leader in providing very client-centered, environmentally compliant management solutions for end-of-life computer equipment and for data destruction services. That's in addition to their robust data security services. In fact, they are one of the only companies providing a full-service data destruction and data security model that can really work hand in hand. Reclamere services save time, money, and minimize detrimental impact related to improper disposal of IT equipment. By securely storing, imaging, and managing the deployment of equipment, they guarantee the protection of sensitive information against data breach and data sets, while alleviating any liability issues related to the environmental impact of disposal through these services, all of which can be performed at their certified facilities or on-site at client locations throughout the United States. So before we start, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. We'll once again run today's presentation in a question and answer format, and we will be opening up for additional questions at the end of today's session. So please feel free to send over questions using the question feature in GoToWebinar. We'll also follow up with all registrants to provide a few tools and assessments that will allow you to take some action based on the information that we'll be covering in today's session. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, so we will provide the link in our follow-up so that you can share the information with other members of your team or perhaps review areas that were of most interest to you. I do want to note that this series has been developed to fit the needs of the general audience. So if you're seeking more advanced data destruction and data security information, please let us know, and Angie will be making herself available for some one-on-one sessions in the upcoming weeks. Now, I'm very proud to introduce your expert speaker today, Angie Singer-Keating. Angie has over 20 years of professional experience, and she spent the last 10 of those years specializing in computer forensics, data recovery, data destruction, security incidents response, information technology risk management, and system auditing. And Angie has actually provided consultancy services related to e-discovery, forensic analysis, data breach response, and risk management within highly regulated industries, such as legal, financial services, healthcare, banking, insurance, and government. As the CEO and co-founder of Reclamere, Angie manages a team of data security experts with over 75 years of combined expertise in complex projects and litigation services. Angie was also the chief architect in the proprietary development of the Reclamere data destruction process. And that process guarantees 100% forensically sound quality control on all hard drives. And the Reclamere on-site data recovery and forensic lab was designed by Angie to ensure maximum security and use of the state-of-the-art industry tools. You can see her many certifications and affiliations listed on the screen. I'm not going to read those to you. However, Angie is also a member of the National Association for Information Destruction. She's a member and treasurer. She has extensive experience working with legal firms in areas such as litigation support, forensics, and data recovery. And she has completed numerous national speaking engagements with topics ranging from computer forensics and compliant employee investigations, e-discovery and computer forensics, what's the difference, and 5 things to know about acceptable use policies. So it's my pleasure again to welcome Angie Singer-Keating. Angie, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us today.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to work with you on these educational efforts, Angie. And every time you do an introduction, I feel like I should lay down and take a nap because that's a lot.
It is a lot, but you have quite a background. So today you can see on the screen that we will be focusing on some very key thought-provoking questions. And these questions were actually designed to help you, our audience, to reevaluate your own data destruction and data security processes. Now, in addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, as we go through these slides today and have this discussion, we're hoping that you're reevaluating, but we're also going to be providing some follow-up tools in addition to what we covered today. So, Angie, I have seen the increased closures and failures in the data destruction industry. Can you touch on why this is happening and why it's so important for our audience to be aware of this?
Well, there kind of is the perfect storm out there right now in the electronics and recycling world in general. Most of the companies that work in electronics recycling were born out of the scrap world, smashing up cars, shredding metal, that type of environment without any knowledge of data security and, quite frankly, no need. However, as the commodities inside of computers became known to be so valuable about 10, 15 years ago, these companies started saying, hey, we can pull this stuff out. And so while the economy was booming and the commodity prices were high, it was a very lucrative business model. You didn't have to charge anyone to take any material because you simply ripped it apart and you threw in the landfill what you couldn't use and you got paid for what you could, and it was a great thing. But the challenge came along when the economy tanked along about 2007, 2008, and that has also had an impact on commodity prices. I was just recently reading about how the value of stainless steel is at an all-time low, and there are no indications that it will be coming back. And so when there is very little money on the back end of processing and doing the recycling, then business models that were based on that revenue are failing. And just in a newsletter of the American Metals Association, I believe, they have bankruptcies, articles about bankruptcies of electronics recyclers in Michigan, Washington State, Illinois, an electronics recycler who was recently jailed in Alabama, and there are various other types of problems that are happening in our industry. So that is one of the reasons. And then when we combine that with the increased regulatory scrutiny, when you take into account the fact that one single hard drive can hold as many records as a tractor trailer, it becomes very obvious that protection of that information at every single step of the way, from when it's born to when it needs to die, must be managed by people who have expertise in every phase of the life cycle. And with the increased enforcement, there's more litigation happening over data breaches. There are actually now criminal penalties if you are talking about the world of healthcare for the HIPAA security rule. And the HIPAA security rule was recently expanded. So you may not think HIPAA applies to you because that's just the form that your doctor makes you fill out. But as of September of last year, if you do business with healthcare and you are in any way given access to their health information, their patient health information, PHI, you are now subject to HIPAA. So it really is it really is a perfect storm, as I said, of a lot of different things happening that is putting pressure on the industry, and the people who are really on the losing end are the clients, whose material may be in the wrong places and whose data may be exposed and compromised.
And I think that really is the key point in terms of, our audience, because we know that everyone is at least marginally concerned about enforcement action. So why is it more important now to understand this, and how do these regulators interact or coincide, or do they even?
Well, they do, and a lot of the regulations are have a whistleblower clause. So you may think that you're not going to get caught. However, if a competitor knows that, for instance, you're one of the firms that is stockpiling millions of pounds of CRT monitors, they may very well decide to turn you into the U.S. EPA. If you are a business associate who works with healthcare information and you have a disgruntled employee who realizes that you have terrible security practices, then you may be subject to that person becoming a whistleblower and calling you out to the Office of Civil Rights or your state attorney general. So a lot of this happens from whistleblowers. As it relates to the environmental side, there are groups that are active in tracking down the bad actors and bringing it to light. One of the most famous is an organization called the Basel Action Network, which is known as BAN. And what they have done is that they have worked very hard to watch recyclers, to get container numbers of the shipping containers that are leaving, and then trace those shipping containers to where they end up. The government also, since 9/11 with Homeland Security issues, now x-rays, if not all, a significant number of ocean containers to be able to see that if there are computer monitors on there, that they're most likely being illegally exported to a developing nation to pollute that country.
Yeah, the increasing litigation to me has always been very interesting, because at face value, some of this terminology like documentation and transparency seems sort of subjective. So, why is the litigation increasing, and how does an organization learn from this?
Well, I think the litigation is increasing because I quite frankly am married to a lawyer, but I think lawyers see that there's money to be made, number one, because the settlements are getting larger. The other thing that recently happened, which is really an anomaly, was a case where patients sued a pharmaceutical company for a lost laptop. There was no evidence that their data was breached. There was no evidence that the records were ever used in any way, and they sued the company. I believe the company's name is AvMed, and they actually won their first round of litigation. And this is one of the first times that data breach litigation has been permitted to move forward without tangible, real damages. And so in this particular case, AvMed decided to settle for $3 million and not risk what may happen on appeal. So those things also have contributed to some real challenges around litigation.
Could you talk a moment about HIPAA, and if it is appropriate here, aren't there some upcoming deadlines regarding the use of a business associate or the use of the business associates agreement, and how do you protect yourself from the impact of that in terms of possible litigation?
Yeah, a lot of people will say that, well, where does it say in HIPAA that I have to recycle my computers? And they'll say that about other legislation as well, or other auditing bodies. And in some cases, it doesn't say that, but it implies it. with an ambiguous statement such as, at the end of its useful life, data will be destroyed beyond recovery. But then you get into HIPAA, which is based on the NIST framework, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, and you get into 164.310 D2I that says that you must have policies and procedures and complete documentation that addresses the final disposition of all things that may contain EPHI, electronic patient health information. And it is very specific when it is regarding NIST, because NIST has its own publication around data destruction altogether. And that is something that is very well articulated about HIPAA. One of the biggest, most significant changes was last year when business associates, who are the companies that do business with healthcare and have access in any way to the patient health information, even if they're just shredding up a hard drive, they are a business associate. And prior to the change with the HIPAA omnibus rule, for the most part, a business associate's obligation was purely contractual. You had to have a business associate agreement, which is basically a contract between you and your vendor. If you're in healthcare, or if you're the vendor, you had to have a business associate agreement. And if anything ever went wrong, you really only had to let them know. And to some degree, there was even a question of whether you even had to let your client, the hospital, know that you had lost one of their hard drives, because there really was no enforcement, no way to enforce it other than litigation around the contractual documents that the two parties had entered into. All of that changed with the HIPAA final omnibus rule. Business associates now must comply with HIPAA exactly the way that the covered entities do. And we're beginning to see, in fact, just very recently, we have begun getting calls from our healthcare clients who have had data breaches happen to them because of a business associate. A perfect example are cloud-hosted services. So if you have cloud-hosted services sitting out there and you don't know where that cloud actually is, there could be 3 more subcontractors until you get to the final place where that data actually lives. So these are all of the really complicated things that are now beginning to happen because of the final omnibus rule changes.
I know you are talked about one case study with AvMed and in terms of how that brought in class action to increase the potential cost of a data breach. I'm wondering how real you feel this is. In other words, do you see that this situation will be repeated in the future?
I have absolutely no doubt it will be repeated in the future. One of the seminars that I give is called Tales from the Trenches. And I don't pull stories out of the newspaper and analyze them. I tell real stories about real cases and real incidents that my clients, some of them very small startups, all the way up to global corporations, that they've experienced and the lessons learned. So this is not just something that happens to the big guys. And in fact, as it relates to HIPAA, there is a lot of talk that the OCR will be making examples of business associates this year, much the way that they put an emphasis on smaller organizations and ancillary services in the past 2 years to basically say nobody is too small for HIPAA enforcement. So those are the kind of things that are actually really, truly happening. And as I said, you won't just get caught because a huge thing happens, you're most likely to have some type of person, whether it be an employer or employee, whether it be a competitor, whether it be a disgruntled patient who sees you throw a computer in a dumpster. Those are all of the people who are going to have the potential to turn you into the proper authorities. Or go to the news. That's the other option.
And you mentioned already this whole idea of now, you can track where the equipment ends up. The fact is that some organizations and even some of our audience members may be working with data destruction and equipment destruction companies that they feel they've already vetted. But those companies may be working with brokers. It just seems a little scary to me. So what are some real-life examples or thoughts you have in terms of how this is now being tracked? And then to take it a little bit further, how does our audience make sure that they're not caught up in a situation like this?
Well, the key really is proper due diligence. And I know I keep going back to healthcare with HIPAA, but it really is one of the most enforced regulations right now. And with healthcare being such a giant sector of our economy, it really touches so many businesses. But the issue around how do you make sure really comes down to due diligence. And ultimately, under HIPAA, you are responsible for the vendor that you choose. I just had this conversation today with a potential client who is in the middle of an incident where over 500 records have most likely been breached, and they thought that their data was hosted with one vendor, and it turns out that that vendor only owns the application and it's hosted at another vendor. And the clock is now ticking to comply. And the issue around due diligence is the fact that even though that last vendor who actually hosts the data was potentially negligent or failed to have everything in place, the first vendor failed to do proper due diligence in selecting them, likely, and ultimately the healthcare organization failed to do proper due diligence on the first vendor. They didn't even realize that there was a subcontractor, so that is absolutely a classic case of failure to do due diligence. So, one of the ways that you can look at these organizations is through certifications, is through specific types of insurance coverage that we're going to get into later, also looking at their financial stability, and also looking at their facility. If you can actually go and see, and I know not all of us can do this, but if you can actually go to the endpoint of where your material is being processed, that is really important. And if you're using a regional provider, there's really no excuse not to do a visit. And if they are a reputable legal provider of asset management services, they will welcome your visit. They will want to brag about how secure they are. They will want you to experience that. If you have a vendor who says, well, you have to schedule it ahead of time and really kind of is vague about you coming to do a due diligence visit, that's a big red flag.
One of the things you've spoken to me about, and I know, we just talked a little bit about HIPAA and healthcare, that also is personally identifiable information that is in many, many industries that can remain on computers. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and, what is considered identifiable information that companies should be concerned about?
Well, I'll give you the typical consultant's answer. It depends. It actually depends on which of the 45 states you're in that have data breach notification laws. And so what the state data breach notification laws cover is exactly what you just mentioned, Angie, personally identifiable information. And in most states, in all states, that starts with your name. And then generally speaking, it is 1 to 2 other pieces of information together that allow your identity to be stolen. So your social security number, your driver's license number, bank account or other type of account information. That's all PII under every state's regulation. However, some states are more stringent than others, such as California, which now includes zip codes as part of personally identifiable information. And you think that's public. However, there have been issues apparently in California where zip codes were used for, I guess, not so good purposes. So it's not just a regulated industry that has this concern. It's any business that has employees. It's any business who has clients where they do credit checks on them and have that information. It's any business that takes credit cards. So it really, the regulations around protection of data reach every type of industry and every size of business.
The vision that I'm bringing up shows the differences state to state, and I think it's compelling. Can you talk about the comparisons and nuances between being federally compliant and state compliant? And also, one of the things that's always interesting to me is, do you have to worry about the state that you do business in or the one where you have patients or members or clients residing? And I think that's a large topic, but if you could speak to that.
Well, you know, as our topic today is very, very broad, very, very wide, and thin in depth because of the complexities and the time limits that we have to look at state law in two contexts, one environmental and one data. And I think we've covered the data issue. The data issue involves the state where your customer or employee lives. So if you have remote employees and you're based in Pennsylvania and you have remote employees who live in California, then it is highly advised that you would follow California's law. Now, people that want to argue, people that, watch a little too much, Boston Legal and want to argue the nuances of the law can say that California can't tell Pennsylvania what to do. However, do you really want to risk it and have the state of California sue you? So you have to understand with data where your victims live, and those are the laws that you need to comply with. As it relates to the environmental laws around e-waste disposition, as you can see from this map, it is a complete hodgepodge. And if you think, well, wow, I do business in Montana, all my employees live in Montana, all my customers live in Montana, and I'm not regulated in any way, I can throw this stuff in the dumpster. That's not correct, because ultimately e-waste has toxic materials in it. And especially when we're talking about the CRTs, we have lead, we have phosphor gas, we have plastics full of heaven knows what kinds of chemicals. So the ultimate EPA, while they may not have specific laws about what you can do in each state, there certainly is the reasonableness standard that with everything that's known today about pollution and about the heavy metals and toxic chemicals in electronic waste, that it simply is not reasonable to throw this stuff into a river. And most states have some type of landfill ban, or the large companies that tend to own those landfills just simply won't take them because of the liability. So that's why it's very important that you operate to best practices regardless of what your particular state law might be on the environment.
Interesting. Angie, when I want you to talk a little bit about NIST, but one of the things for me is when I look at this and I think about revisions and the fact that there's 800 guidelines for security and disposition, to me it's such a big number. Where does an organization even start with that?
Well, 800 refers to the series number. So NIST is the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, and they are the folks who are right now very involved in the President's initiative on cybersecurity and writing best practices. Their frameworks around information privacy, security, encryption, anything that to do with cybersecurity in any conceivable way has an actual guideline called the 800 series. So, for instance, if you are going to have an asset disposition program that is going to operate to NIST standards, which many vendors say they do, then you are going to follow 88 Rev 1. Rev 1 is very important because it just recently was published in its final form. It is the reasonableness standard to which the government, the Federal Trade Commission, anyone who really legislates and regulates data security considers NIST publications a reasonableness standard. And it provides the framework for many of those things like Gram-Leach, Bliley, those types of things. So when we look at NIST, we look at the 888. Rev 1 is so important because back when the original 888 came out, there were no portable devices that could carry around as much data as 5 hard drive servers. You have 5 hard drives in a server. And so the form factor, all of the technology changes, none of them were addressed. If you were getting rid of a server, a laptop, a desktop, you were in good shape. They gave you exactly how to do it. So Rev 1 is so important because it just came out and it addresses every form factor, various operating systems, such as what you do with an iOS device versus what you do with an Android device. And the biggest key of all is that anyone who tells you they follow the NIST guideline for their asset disposition and cannot walk you through their quality control program is not following the NIST standard. Because the NIST standard very, very, very clearly states that quality control, meaning checking the hard drive that the data is truly gone, is a requirement. And then for folks on the line who think, well, I'm an IT guy, that 888, that's for the facilities people. That's for them to worry about. Well, you weren't left out because there's another publication called NIST 853, Rev 4, which addresses all aspects of a robust, reasonable security program. And it very specifically talks about, in one particular part, the obligation to destroy information, and it goes through all of the steps that need to happen, and then also refers to NIST 888. So asset disposition is its own entity, but it is also part of every publication that has anything to do with securing the life cycle of information.
So let's just keep focusing on that for a little bit more. It seems to me that there are probably organizations that may not be up to the standards that are in Rev 1.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do. When as you know, Angie, I am an information systems auditor. I do a lot of HIPAA security risk assessment work, and I can tell you that a major finding that I always have is at the disposition stage. I've been in organizations that have world-class IT security programs, but everything stopped once the device came off the network. So we have great control when it comes in the building because accounting wants to know what was bought. And then we have great control while it's on the network because we have all kinds of great tools that will tell us about that. And then it needs to leave. It needs to be taken out of service. And all of a sudden, nobody knows what really happens to it. Or they know and they can tell you, but they can't prove it with any kind of documentation. And here's the issue about standards and regulations. If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. So the documentation is one of the absolute most critical pieces. And when people say, well, why do you charge me to destroy my information? The reason that we charge is to have a robust quality control program that a forensics expert has vetted, designed, and maintained to give you proper documentation that not a single hard drive has been missed and that every single serial number of every single hard drive ties back to every single piece of equipment from which it came, and that we are experts who know how to look at your multifunction printer, your mobile devices, and anything that comes in here, even a heart monitoring device, to find out if it has onboard storage that contains sensitive, regulated information. So that's really the biggest thing about any of these regulations is that you have to be able to prove it. And rarely can an organization, when I come in, prove what happens with their material.
So with those quality control programs, do you find more organizations perform those tasks in-house or are outsourcing them?
Well, most organizations consider quality control to be when the program they use to wipe the hard drive tells them that the drive is wiped. That's not quality control. That's the fox guarding the hen house. Independent validation is required. But that's not just validation of the client's material. That also speaks to good process management of the vendor, good change management processes, because anytime new devices come out, such as solid-state hard drives, and their processes may change, they need to have their hard drives and devices tested to make sure that their process is compliant, and companies like ours have that done by an outside forensic company to make sure before we release the new process into the organization. So those are really the things that are so crucial.
I think because I work with a lot of clients in highly regulated industries, that I feel they know there's a price for peace of mind when it comes to the topics we're discussing today. And that really is one area that you excel in, and that's giving these organizations a place to start. And so when I look at these 5 key principles that you're going to talk about, it really helps them to evaluate. When I look at, for example, number 3, the highest priority being data security, it seems like data security is everything. How do these 5 steps fit together, and how do you, consult with an organization in regards to these 5 principles?
Well, I don't want to imply that an organization cannot have a robust, compliant asset disposition program that they perform in-house. That's not the case. These are 5 of the high-level areas of focus that the organization has to consider when they're creating their end-of-life program. I've learned something very valuable from you, Angie, in the help that you've given Reclamere around our marketing and the success that you've helped us achieve. Let the experts do what the experts do so that you can focus on the mission of your business. And unless you have the resources in your company to take accurate inventory, to classify all of the data, to make sure that every person involved in the disposition process understands data security in every form factor, has the staff to do everything that's necessary for the documentation and the transparency and the auditability, it's probably a good idea to have an expert do that. And so how we can help is by basically, fundamentally, from purely a consulting role, is to look at the life cycle of your information in your organization from start to finish. Because not only is security important at the end, it's also important at the beginning. We can receive material, servers, laptops, desktops, mobile devices, from the vendor when you purchase, make sure that they are properly imaged, properly inventoried, and then sent on to your facility without you having to store them or image hundreds, if not thousands, of devices. And then we manage the process for the materials to come back out and make sure that one computer in equals one computer out, and keep that reconciliation and that tracking. So those are some of that's one of the ways that we can consult. And then at the other scale, the other end of the scale, is that you have old computers, you need them to be securely destroyed, and you have your own internal program that got those pieces to the dock, and you are good with that. We're the people who can show up and take it away. And then everything in between on that spectrum.
I know we talked in the last webinar, and you already mentioned how important a site visit is. Is there anything else that you would like to add with regards to not just how they select their vendor and partner, but also what you welcome at Reclamere in terms of when somebody is reviewing your services?
Sure. The things that that folks want to focus on are a couple deal breakers, really. If you're in healthcare, the first thing you want to ask them is, have they had a security risk assessment performed in accordance with HIPAA? And if that kind of goes right over their head, that's a red flag and probably a deal breaker. You also want to understand what types of insurance they have. This is crucial because not every kind of situation is covered by just a big fat general liability policy. So for instance, if the company does not have a specific environmental liability coverage endorsement, nothing is going to be covered that ends up in a landfill, exported overseas, or creates some kind of environmental situation. The next thing is around the data security. One of the reasons that I am involved in NIST is because they are an advocate for the client of the destruction provider. And being a client advocate, they saw a problem in the destruction industry, paper as well as electronic, that we vendors did not have the proper coverage for liability for destroying information. And the coverages that we did have did not cover the types of things that can happen in the destruction process, such as theft, willful misconduct, neglect. And so they went to Lloyd's of London, who developed an insurance product that they underwrote, and the only companies that can get this specific coverage, which covers the company, you, their client, and your client, is something called downstream data. And the only folks who can get that are NIST AAA certified companies. And one of the biggest accomplishments that I'm very proud of when I served on the Certification Rules Committee as the chair was the starting the process of bringing the NATE certification criteria, which is managed by third-party independent auditors and even involves unannounced audits. I'm very proud of the fact that we are working towards aligning the NATE AAA certification with the HIPAA security rule so that clients can know that there is another layer of due diligence on a NATE AAA certified vendor that meets the criteria of the HIPAA security rule. And only NATE AAA certified folks can have the downstream liability insurance, and that is absolutely crucial. Typical errors and omissions insurance does not cover those types of incidents. General liability does not cover those types of incidents, and it really is crucial that they have this insurance coverage for you.
So I think you covered this regarding NATE. Is there a way other than simply asking that somebody can that provide?
Absolutely. There is a NATE website. It's nateonline.org. And you can go there and search for NATE AAA certified service providers in your region. If you're large enough to need national coverage, you will find companies like Reclamere, where we're listed in every state because we provide services in every state. And you'll be able to take a look at how long they've been certified, how long they've been in part of NATE, and you'll really be able to see the options in terms of who you want to work with. The one word of caution right now is that NATE membership is not the same thing as NATE certification. NATE certification means you have been audited by an accredited independent third-party audit, that you have subjected yourself to unannounced audits at any time for any reason, that you are willing to be part of the regulatory program and the self-policing program of NATE with the Complaint Resolution Council, the Ethics Council. It means that you have gone the extra 10 miles to protect client information during the destruction process.
And certainly our audience in terms of healthcare and other industries, understand these certifications and their meanings, and I think this is just so valuable. One of the things that I'd love you to give us some final tips on is what you mean by data never dies. It actually reminds me of what I'm always telling my teenagers about what they put on social media. What does this actually mean, and what does it mean? What does it mean for the audience?
Well, it's actually pretty analogous to that. During the life cycle of data, particularly because of business continuity and disaster recovery plans, particularly because people like to carry data around with them, the information that you have has been replicated in so many, many places. And the small form factors also have some unique challenges as far as how to make sure the data is gone so that it cannot be recovered by any commercially available means. And so data is born when it is created, and it is managed and kept healthy by IT security folks and programmers and all of those people that keep the data healthy while you're using it. When it comes to the end of life, you don't want it to be like that vampire. You want to put a stake through the heart and make sure it's not coming back to haunt you, that your hard drive is not going to end up on eBay, that you are not going to end up with the news crew showing up at your door because computers bought from a local charity have your patient health information on it in which you care to comment. Another issue is that when people think that they are following a best practice of removing the hard drive and dealing with the hard drive separate from the rest of the unit. What they actually just did is double the risk and eliminate any potential value that a reputable legal vendor will be willing to pay you to offset your costs for material that still has useful life. So keeping the hard drive together is really important from a security standpoint, and for anyone whose budget depends on maximizing return on investment of assets at the end of life, dealing with a computer without a hard drive is kind of like a car without an engine. There's no value. And then the final thing is that hard drives must be wiped multiple times or destroyed. What I mean by multiple times is not to open up the old geek argument of how many times do you have to overwrite it before it's really gone. Research has shown, and NIST guidelines for unclassified information state now that one pass is enough. I advocate the second pass of either ones or zeros in order to make your quality control process easy. So it's very important that no drives are missed and that everything is fully documented. And those drives that fail quality control, or those drives that fail the wiping process, that there is a process in place that they go immediately for physical destruction. And that's how we kill it forever.
Excellent information. Angie, I want to give you an opportunity because I feel like you provided the audience with such valuable education. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel makes Reclamere different?
Well, what makes Reclamere different is the fact that we did not start in the scrap business. We were started by three professionals, myself, my business partner, Joe Harford, and a third business partner, and we brought a professional security and manufacturing quality control background to the process. NATE AAA certification, that program is largely based on, for wiping hard drives, the process that Reclamere created internally and which I shared with NATE to form the basis of the sanitization certification program. We also take our certifications very, very seriously. I'm most proud of our NATE certification because it has teeth, it has enforcement, it has unannounced audits, and I would have the same excitement about R2 and ISO if they had that, however, they don't. The other thing that's really important about us is that our requirements exceed the standards of NIST and the Department of Defense as it relates to quality control. We do quality control on every single hard drive. We know at a forensic bit level if your data is truly gone. And that is something that I'm probably most proud of in our destruction practice. And finally, our expertise. I'm very proud of our expertise. We understand the entire life cycle of information, not just the end. And we understand, because of our work in data breach response, incident investigation, we truly understand what's at stake. We understand that it's a resume-generating event when hard drives are lost or stolen or end up on eBay. And we understand that from an intimate, upfront, close knowledge from all of the clients that we've worked with over a decade, the best ways to prevent anything like that while also keeping you in compliance.
So there's obviously a lot, and this is a lot of information. What I'd like to do at this time with respect to everybody's schedules is to open it up for some questions for the next 5 or 10 minutes. And I already see I have a few questions coming in here, and just to remind you that if you don't feel comfortable asking now, we certainly will follow up with you with additional questions if you have them after the webinar. So Angie, with that said, one of the questions, looks like it's coming in from healthcare, is regarding types of equipment. We've talked about computers, hard drives. Is there other types of equipment that you work with at Reclamere or that the audience should be concerned about?
Yes, absolutely. A couple years back now, CBS did a feature on 60 Minutes about the data left on multifunction printer devices. And those have anywhere from a conventional hard drive to a solid-state drive to simply onboard memory of some sort. And those also must be destroyed properly. And every single OEM provider, every single make of MFT is different. And so you have to have the expertise to know inside of this big giant thing, where is the hard drive? And we are a subcontractor to one of the largest OEMs in the world to help manage old devices whenever they go in and provide new ones. Other things to be cognizant of, if it touches your network in a healthcare scenario, you really have to do a simple risk assessment of understand what it is, what does it store, and does it present any risk to us at Disposition. I can tell you that we've recovered in our forensics lab, we've recovered data from heart monitoring devices, we have recovered data from video surveillance. Just about anything that touches your network in a healthcare environment has the potential to have patient health information on it. And a simple risk assessment, sitting down with the team and going through what does this device do and what does it do with the information, is really crucial.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. This looks like we're becoming a national company. Is there any difference or needs between when we were regional and now expanding nationally?
Yes. You are at a crucial point in your life cycle. Most of the organizations that I go into that have a security program that's lacking in any way, whether it be how their firewalls are configured, how they dispose of information, if they are a company that has seen early success and grown rapidly, which you would be amazed at some of the national clients I could name for you who still were working and operating as the small company that they were decades ago. Now is a crucial time because this job of coming into compliance in healthcare never gets easier. As your company gets bigger, it only gets more complicated. And the other issue is that as you move out to be a national provider, you absolutely have got to have a good vendor management due diligence program for every vendor who touches your data. And that is something that every single healthcare organization we work with is challenged right now, but you are obligated, you are mandated, and if your vendors are not in compliance, you are mandated to either dump them or help them come into compliance. So you have the responsibility for these business associates in all ways. So those are some of the real high-risk areas where you're in a growth mode. Now is the time to really batten down the hatches because there's nothing that stunts growth and destroys profits and destroys careers like a data breach.
So that's a great segue into the next question. I think I'll end with this question. So as you talked about vendors earlier on going out of business, is there any place that we can stay up to date on that news or information?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Two ways. One of the publications that I use, it's free, and it's an industry publication. It's called eScrap News. You simply Google it, it'll take you right there. Great site for any kind of information of what's happening in the electronics recycling world. Not always a great source for data, but definitely a good source for who's going bankrupt. Another thing is to search e-scrap bankruptcy, and you will be surprised at what pops up with that Google search. That is where you will see things like criminal charges filed, an explosion at one recycler that killed 2 people. All of this kind of stuff is what you'll find when you do that particular Google search.
And we can go ahead and make that link to eScrap News available to attendees and registrants as part of the follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop right there because we're right on the hour. Angie, thank you so much for your time. Are there any last points that you would like to make in closing?
Well, one of the points I'd like to make is that those questions that were asked were excellent. If they're indicative of the knowledge level of the audience, it sounds like there are some pretty sharp cookies on the call. I would just simply say that regulation and litigation is only going to continue to increase. Lack of budget, not knowing, none of those things stand up in court, stand up with auditors, or stand up with regulators. So now's the time.
Thanks again. So for our audience, we obviously really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. Just to summarize, we'll be following up and offering a due diligence checklist and some other potentially helpful assessments. We'll also provide you with a link to the recorded webinar and an opportunity to speak one-on-one with Angie Singer-Keating. And of course, as I said, we'll answer any questions we may have overlooked during this question and answer period. Again, thank you for your time and have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone.